Today, I'm talking to Colan Neese. He's puzzling through the problem of anticipating which games are likely to take off at launch and which seem to be headed nowhere. What predictions have you made using the systems and the data that you're looking at that have surprised even you?
Well, first I'll take a quick step back and give credit to the creator and founder of Mind Games. So we were in like a partnership with each other. So I'm kind of the kind of public facing person, and Brian Rogers, who's also pretty public too. He's the creator of Mind Game. We both worked at big tech and saw how big tech did things, which is they take billions of signals across various sources, oftentimes their own walled gardens, to build sophisticated models that can predict outcomes, right? And just to TLDR, like what we're trying to do is we just know there's better data out there to kind of ascertain what's going to be successful or not successful, at least at the global level. So that all aside, table setting wise, let's just go into the first thing that I was like, last year, Summer Game Fest was a bit of an anniversary for us. We did a bunch, we tracked over 500, I think, games across all the SGF events, new games announced, etc., and stood out of there. So Call of Duty won last year, no surprise. If we went out and said Call of Duty's biggest games, like, okay, yeah, and the moon sets and rises, etc. And I'm like, okay, but what's the more interesting one? There's two that stuck out to us. First one was Blacksmith Wukong. Now, this game was obviously a success. I think a lot of things are going to fast follow it now. This is something that was just popping after Summer Game Fest last year. But I could explain why that game would be big. I'm like, well, yeah, it's a Chinese AAA quality game. It's going to have a massive audience in the East. This makes sense to us. The one that really stuck out to me that was like, really, was Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Now, just to take this apart, like, first off, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was not the first Dragon Ball inspired fighting game, right? Not even the second or third, right? So there are plenty of Dragon Ball fighting games out there right now. So it's not first to a mass market of people that are really excited about this game. So, like, what about this game really is finding an audience? And it's really, I think it captured the spirit of the anime show and it being able to recreate moments, which is what they did in the marketing assets. You start watching all the YouTube videos that were getting tens of millions of views, you could realize, like, oh, they're telling the entire Cell Saga in the fighting game. That's an interesting angle. So out of that, we were like, this is going to be a hit in the fall. And we were all basically telling people this. And they're like, no, fighting games outside Mortal Kombat don't do more than 10 million players. Out comes Dragon Ball, and it was one of the top 3 games last fall, right?
Wow.
And a massive hit for, I believe, Bandai is the one that published it. But, like, great game, great use of IP, found an audience, blew past what would be expected TAM. So that's, like, the first game that, like, gave me pause and was like, is this game really going to be a hit?
Right.
It ended up being a hit. And I'm like, well.
So that was the first one where you were like, okay, I see the model predicting something. I don't know. And then it went, then you were like, okay, all right, the model's working.
Yeah, I know, exactly right. You're like, I think this will be a hit, and we'll hedge it a bit and say the data so far looks like it's got some heat behind it, but things could happen. And even though our model was like, no, this game is going to be a monster hit, you should just buy the model. But you start putting your own real world lens on it. I would say your own bias of what I actually play, what I see people around me play, how many backpacks do I count at my kid's school, that sort of like real world, like kind of biases that people all find themselves in that tell me, no, this is not as big as I think it's going to be. And ultimately because there's other Dragon Ball games, this kind of I kept going back to, there were other Dragon Ball games to kind of proxy the TAM towards, and you're like, oh, it's going into a market that already exists. What could it possibly do new and different to find that audience? And it definitely did.
Okay, continuing on. So that was the big surprise for you last year. That your model called it. What about more recently?
Oh, recently, I would say I think popular. Well, I'll go 2. Can I give you 2 answers on this one?
Yeah.
One that's being written about, case studies. We'll get a Game of the Year nomination, I'm sure, at the Game Awards in the winter. But it's definitely Claire Obscure. And this, again, goes back to Summer Game Fest last year. So to all those people who listen to this podcast in July, SGF matters for things that break through. And so we did a top 25 list of games that broke through out of SGF internally. And on that list, passing some, I won't say who, but passing some notable RPG franchises, let's say, was Claire Obscure. And I was like, what's this? First time game from a first time developer team. I was like, this can't be real. But after what we saw in the fall last year and into Q1, I'm like, gotta trust the model. This will be a hit. So we started publicly saying, like, come April, watch out. This Clay Obscure game is going to definitely find an audience. It's definitely going to be a hit. It's got some heat behind it, et cetera, et cetera. And that really born to be true, which is, I think, great for the gaming industry to see these things happen. It's taking what I think people thought were dead genres, like, oh, who wants to play a turn-based RPG? I guess, like, Baldur's Gate kind of shifted that thinking a little bit, but, like, really a turn-based RPG. No. And who wants to play... And it's not even a JRPG. It's a French spin on what a JRPG is. So it does feel very, like, obviously informed and inspired by the tropes of the JRPG genre. But if you play it, there are some definite things where it's like, first 20 minutes of that game, you're like, well, this is bleaker than games I've played in this genre out the gate. Like, there's some heavy themes going on here. And it's definitely feels very French. You put in 10 minutes of that game, you're like, yeah, this definitely feels of the nation France and the culture that is French. And I think it's great for all those things, right? So seeing it succeed was like another quote unquote surprise. But like, this is what we tell people, like, there are not surprises in the industry per us. Like, we don't think there are surprises. There are very few and far between. Like, the surprise is when Oblivion launches with about 2 weeks notice. Like, it gets leaked that they're going to launch Oblivion as a remastered. You see some percolation happening, and it shoots out of a cannon and becomes what we define as an S-tier game in our system. Like, okay, yeah, that does happen. That is a surprise because it wasn't expected to drop when it did. But those are very, very few and far between. Like, you have Oblivion remastered, you have Apex Legends. These are unicorns. They are not the norm. The norm is developers out years in advance, building community, building awareness of the game. Maybe they find a publisher who then also kind of starts doing that stuff, right? And it's not just like things shoot out of a cannon out of nowhere. Going back to Blacksmith, they spent years hyping that game. They spent years putting out assets, and then they're being called vaporware by everyone. Like, this cannot be real. This is all vaporware. And then they finally released the game, and it was real. Kudos to them and kudos to all the work they did, but to think that they just did it out of nowhere, it's like, it really underserves the actual effort they put into this and how much they were going out there, how they were very forthcoming with the assets that they had at the time, and like building up interest and demand and hype that ultimately kind of yielded a huge player base. Same could be said about Clay Obscure. Same thing, right? They were out there earlier than people expect. And doing all the things you need to do to kind of build an audience.
What's interesting about Clair Obscure too is it would be easy to go, well, Black Myth Wukong ties into Eastern mythology really well, and they're like, it did have all that run up to, and Dragon Ball Z, they've got a big IP. Clair Obscure, like, it's a brand new IP.
It's clearly made by people who know how to make games. Let's say that. So ex-Ubisoft people, which may be something more interesting to talk about Ubisoft that maybe won't go on. But, like, you let a bunch of clearly really talented people go who really wanted to make this style of game. And when they got the freedom to do so, they found an audience that was hungry for this specific type of game, which is amazing. So, like what I was saying at the kickoff of, our conversation, there's more opportunity to be more creative than I think people think there is. Like, you can build something completely unique and amazing and, like, find an audience. I think there's more room to do that now than there ever was before. I just think on the flip side, there's just more competition to do that than ever before too. So it's like the flip side of the opportunities. Ultimately, there's more opportunity, there's less and more competition, right?
So you were saying there was two that you want to talk about. Clair Obscure was one. What was the other one?
Well, I guess it's out, but like, and I think we were very. This is one where the model was telling us consistently, like, we're looking at June and we're like, oh, Mario Kart World, and we're looking at Death Stranding 2, and we're looking at Dune Awakening, and the thing that was above all of them in interest and demand, granted it's kind of already out already, but was coming out with a paid version at like a low price point, was Deltarune, Toby Fox's thing, right? And I'm like, is this really going to blow up the way our model says it's going to blow up? And I would say right now the answer is yes. We put out some content yesterday, our first newsletter, just diving into Deltarune, because it's something that the industry's not even talking about. Everyone is so focused on these shiny AAA things. And to be fair, I get it. I, too, am going to sign off early on Friday, pick up my Switch 2, and play some Mario Kart all weekend because I'm really excited about this game and the new device. So I'm not immune to that like hype train, but there is a huge swell of community behind Toby Fox, broadly speaking, but Undertale and Deltarune that is there to play this game. So coming out of the Switch 2 event, the top game coming out of Switch 2 event was Mario Kart, which I believe its players will be tied 1-to-1 to Switch 2 sales. I think everyone that buys a Switch 2 will buy a Mario Kart game, right? So it's a 1-to-1 piece, right? But if there was what the second most successful game coming out the gate for Switch 2 going to be, I think it's going to be Deltarune. And I think it's because, so what are they doing that's really interesting, or like where I think they'll be successful? They're launching on every device, PS4, PS5s, Switch 2, Switch 1, Steam. They're going to be on everything. So they're maximizing their TAM there. 2, they have spent years with the first chapter, the second chapter, building this audience to now say it's paid after this point. I think while some of that community got really upset about that, I think the transparency that Toby had with that was pretty honest. Like, look, I'm going to ask for this once, and I will give you every piece of chapter moving forward. But I think I've proven myself with what we've done so far to basically kind of warrant this ask from my community. And I think he's going to be very successful in that. And like what I would take away from that is community, and communication, right? He builds community by communicating to his community, right? Because as far as I could tell, I don't think he's spending $0 in paid. Like he's not out there buying Twitch's leadership or leaderboard off the top streamers to play Deltarune all weekend. No, that's not the game he's in. He's spending $0 to market this game, which I think will bore him more ARPU per player he gets in there than otherwise would be. And it's great. So it's great to see for Deltarune, and like I think just seeing what it was doing on SteamDB, which is why we rushed our newsletter out earlier than we wanted to. It was already trending at 133,000 concurrents on Steam.
Last I saw it was 113, so it's already gone up past that. Wow.
Yeah, he was the number 1 new game on Steam as of today. Unsurprising. And so it's and that's just one platform it'll be played on, right? It's we always say don't overanalyze what you see on Steam, because Steam is very just focused on a very specific type of player, which is if you were to look at all the top trending games on Steam over the last 3 years, like a game called Banana is like one of the top like 5. You're like, well, did Banana sell more than Elden Ring? No. So take Steam and analytics as an input, but not the full story of what's happening in the ecosystem.
Is there anything that people were expecting to do much better than it ended up doing, and your model predicted that? Anything that sort of underperformed relative to what you saw in the ecosystem?
Oh, man. Well, I'm public about it, so I could talk about it. I feel like my feelings be known. Indiana Jones. Man, this is another SGF thing from last year. I will say it did not rank in the top 50 games coming out of SGF last year. And that's crazy thinking how much attention it got during the Xbox showcase last year. It was one of the more featured games, and it generated no increased mind share coming out of that. And so the question goes, okay, so it's a bit of a sign when you do this and you don't see anything. So kind of fast forward, we're like, well, they're releasing in December. What else is coming on December? This train that could not be stopped, Marvel Rivals. We are on Marvel Rivals really, really early. And what we would say about that, and I think the case study that is very true for Marvel Rivals, and I'll touch on this a little bit, is that every time they gave people the game to play via the alpha and beta, demand and mindshare grew like crazy. It was like it just shot out of a cannon. So every time people actually played the game, they were sold on the game, is what that would tell me, right? Yeah. And those were 2 of the major beats throughout their campaign. So we knew coming out in December, this game is going to be a beast. Now, one of the surprises, because surprises do happen in the industry, PoE decided to release PoE 2 Early Access the same week, right on top of Marvel Rivals. So you had these 2 gargantuan games, and both of them succeeded.
Yeah.
And in the space that we what Mind Game really is doing is that we're trying to quantify the attention economy in gaming, right? So what we tell our partners all the time is, you look at a release window and you think you're competing against just what's coming out at the same time as you. That could not be more false. You are first competing against everything that exists out before then, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to be honest about the market, 85% of player attention is going to be on games that are already out. They're not going to leave because there's, I always call it the 3 layers of switching costs. The switching cost of, I paid for this game, or I've put as much money into the virtual currency system. So for me to leave it, there's a sunk cost for me to leave it. So that's like switching cost 1. Switching cost 2 is time and skill. I've put in my 10,000 hour Malcolm Gladwell hours into this thing. I am the best at this game. So for my skill, it's a hard thing to me to switch off this game. And the third switching cost, which I think everybody in the industry undervalues, is the social networks and the social graphs these games create. People build friend groups. People build lives inside these ecosystems. Like World of Warcraft is probably an amazing case that has been written about tons, where people's lives have been real lives, like in the real world, have been impacted by what they do in World of Warcraft. Now multiply that across thousands of games where people have similar experiences, but maybe not as much PR behind it as World of Warcraft. So those 3 gravitational pulls are pulling on players to stay where they are at. But it's not that gamers won't play new things. So we always say there's 15% of attention up for grabs on a given week. Okay, how are they going to spend that 15%, right? So when you release Path of Exile and Marvel Rivals, that is easily like 85% of that 50% off the table to begin with. So you're left as Indiana Jones, also releasing the same week as them, who's never going to survive, given that, or never find success initially, given that we noticed that there was no demand coming into that December release, knowing that Marvel Rivals was going to win out if it was just them 2, and knowing that Path of Exile just kind of dumped on top of them, and with the Path of Exile 2 early access. So there's a loser. There's always going to be loser and losers with the stuff. In that case, I would say Indiana Jones. And the advice I'd give game developers, one thing I tell people all the time, and publishers, is like, be willing to move your release date. Don't be anchored on it. Like, I know there's a lot of challenges with that, especially the bigger the organization, the harder it is to move your release date for a variety of reasons. But you can save your games like by millions of players by just shifting it by 2 weeks one way or 2 weeks the other way. Literally, we have done this case study over and over and over again for people, our partners, to show them like the impact of just moving your game out of a way of things. Like monster games will impact your TAM by drawing in millions of more players who are there to play your game at that moment in time, right? So if I were Indiana Jones, I would have moved your game to January, knowing that, yes, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, another game we had tracked very early on, was going to be a big game. But like, you could have cohabitated with that game very easily versus going against Marvel Rivals.
Does this sound familiar? You're in a leadership role at a game studio. Everyone is busy working. No one has any time. But the actual game itself, isn't in a good spot. Maybe it's the tech. Maybe it's the lack of a validated prototype. Maybe it's that every person seems to have a different idea about what we're trying to build. But you've got a job. There are reports to send, meetings to schedule and facilitate, the occasional season of performance reviews to go through. And everyone is always so busy. When you step back, it makes you wonder if everyone is just going to keep slowly walking towards the abyss until the project or game fails. Is this what it means to be a leader in games? In tech? To endlessly repeat the same sequence of meetings without really moving the needle? To spend hours trying to get Jira tickets and dashboards where they should be? To pretend that everything is fine when you know deep down it really isn't? It doesn't have to be this way. You can make a difference. You can help your team and game succeed, but sometimes you need a bit of help to get there. I've started a game dev leadership accelerator. It aims to level up leaders who see opportunities to make a difference but don't know how to capitalize on them. We'll walk through what it means to lead well and give you tools to understand your organization's challenges and implement changes to overcome them. Game dev is hard. Knowing how to lead will give you an edge. It will still be hard, but you'll be ready to tackle it. If you're interested, let me know below, hit the link. I hope to see you in the accelerator because I believe better leaders will help teams make better games, and I look forward to someday playing what you create. That's great stuff. Okay, so you started to talk about some of these things. Second thing I wanted to hit on, what are the big things that you are looking for? And I want to give a little bit of because I'm not an expert in this. I've been in the game dev industry for a minute. I've been watching things and I see a lot of people talking about Steam wish lists. Obviously, they're later on you might be looking at Metacritic. I feel like that's less and less relevant over time. You were talking about surveys of the player base, or there's all these different things, and and I've seen people argue about which one works, and if you're a new company or a new studio, you're trying to spin up a game, look, don't worry about these. Okay, you've got something that's working. Like, without, don't, I don't know, give away your IP, I guess. But, like, what are the things that you tend to be looking at and spotting as it comes to, like, is this going to work out or not?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So, things like Steam wishlist, things like Metacritic, I don't want to say they don't completely matter, but we definitely take an angle where they don't necessarily or inform our model all that much. Steam bit more, but definitely not Metacritic. What I would say, what we analyze that kind of feed the overarching Mindshare score that we report on is we look at search trends. Now, a lot of companies will say, well, yeah, we look at our search trends. It doesn't tell us anything. Yes, but if you exhaustively look at the entire ecosystem, it does. So we look at all of it, like literally everything, every single week. And this is true across all the sources that we analyze and look at. So we look at search, we look at YouTube, we look at Twitch, and then we look at Reddit, we look at TikTok, and we look at Steam. And then depending if we're talking about mobile or not mobile, we also, in partnership with AppMagic, we look at download and revenue data for mobile on top of everything else, right? And these are the sources we define as like premium. They provide a good signal with the right weighting behind them that can basically fuel our model that says what's going to find an audience versus not find an audience, what's going to garner that attention versus not garner attention, right? Sources that I think are unfortunately either not good or maybe kind of less important than those are like places like X. We get asked about X all the time and Blue Sky. Candidly, we think TikTok and Reddit are amazing sources. You don't need to go to either of those places. They are less consequential than something like TikTok and Reddit ultimately. So that'd be one. And then two, Metacritic scores.
I mean, obviously that's very close to launch, so there's not, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And like what we say about Metacritic is that it could create a bump. If you have a well-reviewed game that maybe had less of a campaign behind it than other games, then there is a sustained bump. And this is what we always say about sentiment and vibes, basically. Let's take Astrobot, for example, which was my personal game of the year last year. But granted, I have kids, so I'm right in their demo where they just want to play Astrobot all the time. So I have very fond memories of my experience with that. But let's take Astrobot. Yes, it was Sony's big title going in the fall, but I would argue it was the Metacritic and the critical love of this game that really boosted it beyond just a solid platformer release to a, oh wow, this is the next big franchise within the platformer ecosystem. Knowing that Astrobot has been IP before with Sony, they've released demos and they've treated him as a character to onboard people into whatever their controller's doing now or VR experience. But now he's on his own in a really well crafted game, and I would argue that vibes and positive sentiment did uplift that game and turned it into what it ultimately was, Game of the Year, right? So congratulations to Sony and Astrobot, amazing game. And that's where I think Metacritic has an impact. But that said, a lot of poorly reviewed games also find an audience and also do numbers, at least out the gate. But, and this is what we tell people all the time, there's three pillars you fall under as a game from an attention economy standpoint. And the worst one we always say is no attention, meaning nobody knows you're there, thus you have no attention, thus you release the thing into the ecosystem that finds 5 people, but you are just forgotten because no one knew you were there. It doesn't matter how good or bad the thing is. If nobody knows it's there, no one will ever experience the thing, right? And that's sad, but that's the majority of games. In the middle of that is negative. Now, is negative going to hold attention for long? No, it's so fleeting. For example, the Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League was my favorite one to talk about last year because it had an audience at day one. It just didn't stay to week 2, right? It just went up and crashed down. So people, I would say, the internet will watch a car crash, but a car crash cannot hold attention more than a day, right? Or 2 days tops, right? They'll come, they'll watch it, and they'll leave. The third, which is the Astrobots of the world, that's the sustained positive momentum, good Metacritic score, good vibes from the creator community. Everybody loves this game. yeah, there's going to be a backlash because it did win Game of the Year and people are like, over what? But, at the end of the day, like it had great vibes coming out the gate and it was able to sustain that positive sentiment and positive vibes through the entire fall into now, right? Where they're still releasing content behind the game, and gosh bless them, I'm so excited. But like, it's because of the positivity there, right? And that it saw upside from that. So that's where I would define like things like Metacritic and stuff like that. You see it, but you see it in the form of sustained attention, less of like, will it impact its launch?
Got it. Okay.
So yeah.
So like we kind of started getting into this already. I wanted to talk about myths. So you said, look, Steam wishlist not as impactful as people might think. I mean, part of me goes, you go back a couple decades, and it was like, I wouldn't say legacy media, but like the big video game, like your gamer magazines that were starting to go online and things like that. They were very impactful, even if they did like they'd played a beta 6 months before and they posted about it, or they got some early, like there's stuff like this, and I feel like all those things are less relevant now. But so you're saying they do that, they can provide the bump if it's already trending well, they might give you a little bit of a bump. What are the things where people do assume this matters a lot? You talked about X being not one, actually doesn't have a ton of impact, but TikTok and Reddit being pretty impactful. Like, what else do you see in sort of the myth space of, oh, here's this leader and they're saying, I think our game's going to do, that's not going to do very well because of blah, and you're like, that's not actually relevant.
Yeah, a couple of things. Great question. So, like, I think one thing that's a myth is this notion of game overlap, audience overlap between genres. So, I'll say, for example, let's say you are a shooter game and you are going to launch a game coinciding with the release of a new platform like the Switch 2. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? What I would say is this presumption that shooter fans don't play platformer games or don't play, turn-based RPGs or don't play XYZ is kind of you're oversimplifying the game persona that you're trying to map against.
Yes.
Based on honestly a game definition that is so business to business that doesn't like really kind of bleed into the actual players. I say this all the time in our space. Like, we love to talk about the subgenre of a game, like what's match 3. But if you went to a consumer and said, hey, match 3 game, what do you think about it? They'd look at you like you're like, what are you talking about, sir? I play this game or I play that game. They define their preference by game. They do not define their preference by genre.
Yes.
So it's like taking that like to this point, it's like I was talking to someone about this, like the Switch 2, are they quote unquote shooter fans? And I would say, okay, so shooter fans, people usually define them as core gamers. Okay, so what is a core gamer? Well, the Switch 2, if you were lucky enough to get your hands on one, at least on the pre-order side, what you had to do was when they announced their pre-order date, which we were all watching like a hawk, you had to probably go on and log on, at least in the US, to 3 retail sites that were carrying it: Walmart.com, BestBuy.com, and Target.com, right? And you were probably running on a VPN and multiple ISPs to maximize your return on that, right? So if I'm going to win the lottery ticket on one of these retail websites as I wait in this never-ending queue and fight all the internet bots that are also trying to get the Switch 2 sent to their house so they can arbitrage it on eBay, then I'm going to do what I can to kind of maximize my lotto ticket, right? And then I get my hands on one, and I'm like, amazing, right? This is great. And it's going to come to my house today, and I'm going to probably play the game I bought with it, Mario Kart World, which is, 1-to-1. Like, I think Switch 2 sales, at least out the gate, are going to match the Mario Kart World because it's the game you buy. They even bundled it together and made it really easy for me to make that decision, right? So I got my Mario Kart coming to me. Probably going to play that this weekend. Is that my grandma doing that? Who's going to buy me a Switch at my holidays, or my mom for my kids who's going to come around and buy Switches for all the kids on holiday, given it's a $500 price point? Or is that the core gamer who could figure out how to run on multiple ISP or a VPN on multiple ISPs across multiple retail sites to maximize their lotto ticket? I think it's a core gamer that does that sort of thing. So they're not going to play whatever shooter games come out this weekend. They're going to play Mario Kart World. And I think you just have to kind of douse yourself in a little bit of reality. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. The 15% of attainable attention that a game can have on a given week is ultimately zero sum. So this notion that does my audience cross over this, I would say no, it's actually zero sum. So everything competes with everything all the time, even if you think it doesn't, because there's so little demand to go around to new things that you should just treat it all as competition and thus make decisions accordingly and not overthink about what genre your game falls under and whether that overlaps with another game genre, because I think that doesn't matter, right?
There's a couple things there. One, when I was working on League of Legends at Riot, one of the things that we said often, we're not competing with Dota 2. I mean, we are, but that, like, stop looking at that. Stop staring at Dota 2 because it's a MOBA or whatever. We're competing with every live service game, every MMO, every RPG launch, and we're competing with YouTube, and we're competing with TikTok, and we're like everything that grabs for people's attention. That is the thing that we fight with to get people to choose to enjoy and play our game over all the other distractions or opportunities they have to entertain themselves. And so anyway, that just very much lines up with what you're saying. Like, it doesn't matter. And we'd see that, by the way. We'd see that in data. Like, a major game would launch, and you'd take League of Legends, which at the time I think was the biggest game in the world, or could be, according to some measures, perhaps the biggest PC game in the world, and you'd see this, like, dip. And it was always like, okay, well, how long is the dip going to last? And are we going to come back up? And these sorts of things. But the fact that the game that came out wasn't a MOBA wasn't relevant. It was because, like you said, like, what is League of Legends appealing to if not the core gamer who's going to want to spend the 1,000 hours or whatever it is to actually really dive into this game and get good at it and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
100%. And, like, here's a couple of examples of where that's actually true. For your audience, one, I think November is a black month for games, mostly because Call of Duty has obviously owned that month forever. So Call of Duty is going to always release Call of Duty. They have trained the consumer very well that the update to Call of Duty, as I call it, it's not a live service game, but they do sell you an update every single year where they put a fresh coat of paint on it and give it a different thing. And I'm like, which is great. Black Ops 6, I'm happy they went back to the Black Ops kind of subgenre of the Call of Duty ecosystem. But they come out in November. You know what else happens in November? Fortnite, their massive update, right? They this is when they launched OG mode. This is when they relaunched everything else. So they've carved out November as their month. So you're going to launch a game in November. You're going to have to think to yourself, are we going to outspend Activision and Call of Duty to garner attention from users? Knowing that what their marketing budgets are, it's a challenge, not impossible. It's a challenge. And then you also think, and on top of that, Fortnite, unless they change things on their end, is going to do their massive update in November too. So you have to plan around those things because it doesn't matter what your game is, you're going to see a dip. So if you're a live service game, maybe you don't put your update out in November too. You just don't even compete with that. You kind of move it to December or you do it in October. You either get in front of it or you get on the other side of it, but you just avoid that competition. And it's just because you want to maximize that attention and demand you could get, and as opposed to kind of risking it by going head on with things that are going to be predominantly successful because they have such a built-in moat, they have such built-in cachet, they have such built-in brand and IP, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I think, interestingly, there was I think the gaming industry is starting to shift their attention away of looking at the calendar as like basically two windows to release a game, either releasing it in the fall or releasing it in the spring. Like, it's like, oh no, all months are on the table now, right?
Yeah,
like, Power World came out in January, huge success. Is there a secret to January? Yeah, people usually leave it as the elephant graveyard, thinking that people are playing the games they got for Christmas. I think that's nonsense. Put your game out in January. See Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, massive success. What did they do? They released their game in January. I think January is a perfect month to release games now, right? Going into the summer, I don't think there's a dead month in the summer anymore either. I think people will play games 12 months of the year, and you should look at the calendar tactically of, can we take one of these months and fully own it and totally maximize the attention that we could get because we think we have the best thing that can come out in this month, as opposed to sandwiching your game from August through like October, November to get in front of the Black Friday and getting your game out there so you can maximize your holiday numbers. Right? I think that's an old model. I don't think we should think about that industry anymore. I think you should look at the calendar as a 12-month proposition.
I love it. Something I was thinking when you were saying that is, oh man, I know that this isn't when they're going live, but imagine if GTA 6 had decided to launch in November, it would be like, who would have to move? You know, like.
I think everyone was afraid of that. It's so funny. You're looking at it, and that was actually one of the months we had flagged as like the possible GTA launch, because I think there's two companies in the world that don't care about when they do things. One, Nintendo, God bless them. The industry will zig and they will zag in whatever direction fits their fancy in the moment. And to try to put a rhyme and reason box behind it. You just have not been watching Nintendo for like 25 years. They'll just do what they want to do. And just to note, their games sell so much more than everything else we talk about as an industry because they're a little bit more closed about it. Like Mario Kart or Mario Kart Deluxe, granted, came out on the Switch and the Wii U beforehand. I think it's 40 and 50 million copies in its life cycle. That is insane. Knowing that they don't discount either. They're not like, oh, and by the way, this game is now, $5 in our store. Like, no, it's premium the whole time for the most part. Whereas, and the other one being Rockstar and Grand Theft Auto, they could do whatever they want. They could and win that, or they will be successful at least out the gate. The cool question following is that will they be successful? 365 days after that. Probably, I wouldn't bet against it, but that's a better question to ask than will this game sell $2 billion worth in revenue in the first 24 hours? Like, it's probably going to make $2 billion in the first 24 hours. Something we show in some of our viral content is like we love showing the graph where the demand for GTA 6 is greater than every other unreleased game combined. You could fit every other unreleased game's demand in the circle of GTA 6, and there would still be room for more games to fit in there for into the GTA 6 bubble. So so I think I always joke buy the dip with Take-Two. Buy the dip. I think that's people are under guessing how successful that game will be out the gate. And a real monoculture moment for gaming. Not to go to tangent. I love this talk about GTA 6. I think if you're to define what monoculture moments, like TV and monoculture, so like defining a bit, like Game of Thrones is seen as a monocultural event in TV where we all watched Game of Thrones, we all got to the finale, we might have hated it, but we were all there, right? Going back to, the end of Seinfeld and Friends, like these like moments in television that exist, or going to the movie side, Endgame. We all went to Endgame because we had spent 10 years watching Marvel movies.
Return of the King.
We were there. Yeah, exactly, right? And this game is going to be so successful because it is a 3 to 4 generation spanning monoculture moment where I'm an elder millennial. I will be there day one. I was in high school. I tricked my parents to get me GTA 3. I played the heck out of it. Loved it. An amazing experience. And then played Vice City in college, which is my personal favorite GTA, which is I'm excited to see that's where they're returning to. So like I'm the millennial generation. They have me. Arguably, they might have the Gen Xer, right? The Gen Xer, especially the younger side of that, was in college when GTA 3 came out, so they might have a relationship with GTA. But going the other way, I played GTA 5 when I was in, I was like late 20s at this point, or something like that, so great. But then going younger, Gen Z, they grew up with GTA 5. This is their GTA. It's been their GTA for 10 years. They're the ones that have made the role-playing community so big. They're the ones that continually make it so that it's always number one on Twitch, or like one of the top games on Twitch, right? So this is like generation that GTA is the thing, right? GTA 5, and there's never been another GTA for them. And then going to the other side, Gen Alpha, are you like, arguably they're going to want to copy what the Gen Zs are doing, and like they're the ones in high school now, like putting out a premium GTA, this becomes their GTA, right? So I think you just have so many generations plugged into this game that it's going to be just massive. And I think it'll impact, like you said, I think you asked the question without asking it, can gaming impact other media in a negative way? Yes. Joke as you might, they moved Avengers Doomsday.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Why? I would think partially because of GTA 6. I think Mandalorian and Grogu is in a weird spot where they're coming out adjacent to GTA 6. And their audience, they're hoping to go see the Mandalorian movie, is going to be the same audience that's going to be playing GTA 6. So they are going to be fighting for that attention cross entertainment mediums, right? But I think it's going to impact everything because I think there'll be an attention black hole that'll all shift to GTA 6 at that moment in time.
I love that. Yeah. That's crazy. It's again, you don't think about it, but it comes back to what you said at the very beginning, which is games are the biggest. I mean, I was actually looking up the entertainment numbers, and it's funny. I think I'm not totally sure on this, so don't quote me on it. As I throw this out into the internet, but mobile is half of games, just about. It varies some, but mobile's half of games. Take either mobile or your PC console space, and either of those individually is basically as big as is it everything else combined? Like if you look at movies and that's like just half of gaming. And so it's the just, and that's revenue, like, but that's also like time and attention and those things.
Yeah, totally. But and the good thing for other forms of entertainment, like gaming, is a perfect complement to doing something while they do that too, right? So
Yep.
I think like listening to music is the most easy proxy. Like I'm going to play a game, I'm going to turn on my Spotify as background noise. So the music industry is still getting their kind of their attention nickel off of me because I'm going to do two things at once. Or people watch TV shows, like it or not, and they partially pay attention while they're playing their mobile game on the couch, right? So I'm going to play my
Netflix over here, some like relatively low touch game here that guy can just sort of do both at the same time.
Exactly right. So you can do multiple things at one time. You asked me another myth. I think one of the other myths, and like when you really like, we at Mind Game look at all platforms of distribution because we think all gaming is competing with each other, regardless if it's released on mobile, PC, console, Roblox. Like we think it all kind of fits in the same stew where everything competes with everything, right? And so understanding that the biggest games in the world are the ones that are all on every platform, right? So Minecraft and Roblox are the two biggest games in the world. And now you might argue, well, Roblox isn't a game. Roblox is like an app store within an app store, basically, which is true to some extent, to be fair. But like Minecraft, these black hole, games basically, they exist on everything. Right. It is only when you get to the third largest game per our tool, which is GTA 4 will have, or 6, sorry, we'll have some things to say about that. But like Guardian to Free Fire, and what did they do? They're a mobile first game, but what do? They own LATAM, India, North Africa, Southeast Asia. They are in every market that all other people in the industry don't pay attention to because it's not North America or Europe, right, or China. Like it's a big everywhere else, right? Monster game everywhere else. And then right behind that is Fortnite and Grand Theft Auto 5. So Grand Theft Auto 5, obviously not on mobile, but like Fortnite is, right? And famously now back on the iOS.
Right.
Jumped in, sweetie.
We appreciate what you did.
But the industry should absolutely appreciate what he did because I've made this argument publicly. I think the industry will see more value than he will because I think he was value destructive, which was a choice, and he sacrificed a lot. Maybe a better way to frame it. And Epic sacrificed a lot so that the rest of the industry could shine because they lost a lot of users I don't think they'll ever get back on mobile with Fortnite. But the industry is better for it, and everyone should build him a gold statue outside of the video game museum or something. I don't know, because he and I think it'll have downwind impact across other storefronts. Let's say iOS was the first one. It's not going to end there because the same question could be asked across a lot of different ecosystems of like, is this the right tax that we should be paying?
Right.
I digress.
Yeah.
Separate podcast.
Yeah.
It's a hot horse. It's a separate podcast. So yeah, I think platforms of distribution is a bit of a myth, and I think like people need to think of like how can our game potentially reach an audience everywhere if it can, right? And if not, that's fine. You can still find success, but note that the largest games that maximize the attention are the ones that exist on everywhere.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's funny. I made a post recently that said, I was trying to say, if you're making a brand new game, don't assume you're cross-platform unless you really want to commit to that because it's insanely expensive and it comes with a bunch of constraints. It's hard to make a control scheme that works across all.
100%.
And yet, if you can do it, I think actually a lot of games would be better off doing something where they get successful on one and then they figure out how to go to the others. But regardless, if you feel like you could set it up from the start and your game, like a Hearthstone, I think is a great example of that, where it easily fits on a console, it easily fits on a PC. Like the control scheme is very approachable. It makes sense. It makes sense for you to be cross-platform. And like you said, it broadens the audience. And yeah, they're well set up to do that sort of thing. So there was one other note I wanted to say, and it's actually about the first myth you said, and it's really just reinforcing what you said. I talked with a guy named Graham McAllister. He studies vision in game development. So, and he views vision as the number one problem behind why games are failing. Is like from a development side, the developers are not all aligned. The development side is not aligned with the publishing side, and he kind of pointed to the same thing you did, which is we tend to think in terms of these simplified audience groups, like you said, genre, shooter players. And it's always funny to me because as somebody who is, yes, I'm in game development, but I'm also a gamer, as many of us are. There are shooter games I don't like.
And yet I am dominantly a shooter player, right? Like Marvel Rivals, I tried it. It was fun. It's not for me long term. So I put my, I don't know, few hours into it and I was like, okay, that was entertaining. Got to run around as Captain America and Groot and whatever, try to be a tank or, that's what I like to do in that sort of game. But then, like, I'm done. I'm going back off to play Tarkov and Balatro and whatever else, right? Like, and a game called Cosmeteer on Steam. Like, I'm playing all this other random stuff. Some of them are shooters, some of them aren't. But that idea that we can simplify down and say, oh, shooters compete with other shooters, and then some people go, no, it's more nuanced than that. It's like tactical shooters and action shooters, and it's like, no, you're still missing it. Some tactical shooters I quite enjoy, some I absolutely can't stand, and there's something else there, and Graham's actually looking into this, and hopefully he'll be publishing his book and that where he talks about what players are actually looking for and why it's different. But this idea that like you can look at players as if they split into these genre buckets. Like I play RTSs and I don't play racing games except Mario Kart, except Episode 1 Pod Racer, except blah, 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 like, and there's just this complexity in here. Each individual player is so much more nuanced than like, oh, you sit in strategy bucket, or like, oh, you are a flight sim person. Like that's not how it goes.
100%. And shout out Episode 1 Pod Racer.
Oh yeah. Oh, what a game.
Outstanding classic.
What a game.
What a game. What a game. Probably the best thing about Episode 1.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
Pod racing. So kind of taking off that, I think the other thing, I completely agree with all that, right? I think the myopic focus on defining what a gamer is kind of like just it's an odd one for me, because like the other thing is the game development, especially for the shooter games. If I'm going to build the shooter game of the future or whatever that might be, let's say it's going to be 5 years, 4-year dev cycle. You also presume the people you are talking to now don't age into something else, right? Mm-hmm. I myself used to play shooter games back when I had more time. Like I loved playing like Call of Duty and Halo and all sorts of CSGO, played all sorts of shooter games. And then I shifted my behavior because I'm older than I was then, and I look at my skill level, and I know, like, I used to be a big Destiny guy too, and I'm like, I can't put my 10,000 hours into this thing anymore.
Yeah.
And I want to play to be entertained, so I don't like losing a lot or always, right? And so I've naturally shifted my preference toward more story-driven games that have a defined, I guess, definitive middle end, but like that, I put in 300 hours in Elden Ring, and I'm like, is it the end? I don't know, right? So, but loosely like story-driven games, because that's where I want to put my time into now as a form of entertainment. So my behavior shifted, and I think people define myopically, not only do I only play one thing, that my choice of what I choose to play isn't evolutionary with me as a person, and like I think they miss that too. And it also assumes that, oh yes, Colin aged from past 30 and his preferences changed, but those who are coming to be this age, they're going to have the same preferences he had. And I'm like, no,
right? Yeah,
they're not.
Yeah,
that's also not true. That's a challenge with game development. Like movies, you can make in like 2 years, right? Games take much longer than that. So you're trying to almost forecast what's to come, which is why you see all these like famous, or like unfortunate, quote unquote, big misses, because people are. And I sympathize with people on the other side, like. They're building games what they think are popular now, and they assume they're going to be popular when the game comes out, but that's not actually true, which is what I think you're seeing with all these like quote unquote live service failures. I'm like, yeah, they're designing a genre in a game and a type of game that just is much more challenging to put out now than it was in like circa like 2000, right? When all this money came into gaming.
Well, and it's been almost an hour, so it's time to mention Concord.
Oh no.
But no, it's just to say, I remember when Concord came out, a lot of people said, well, it's because hero shooters are dead. And then of course, like Marvel Rivals, and it's like, what are you talking about? And it's, I think that also speaks to that idea of we're oversimplifying down to genres as we look at what would be successful and what would not. And yeah, we're not looking at this.
Well, let me jump in on that, because you're giving me an avenue to kind of talk about something I want to talk about. So the Concord, that is something we could have, told and shared, and we weren't public about, but like something we had flagged as a flop very, very far in advance, because it was not garnering any interest and demand. And if you were to peel back what were the warning signs? This goes back to the platforms we measure. Not any individual platform we look at that feeds our model is going to be the North Star in isolation. It's the relationship between all these platforms and every other game in the ecosystem that's really going to inform our model. So let's take Concord, for example, and like shooter games. Free advice to all developers, publishers who listened to you and made it this far in the podcast. Hopefully I've been riveting thus far. If your game with a gun is not big on Twitch, and I mean big on Twitch as a top 20 game on Twitch during an alpha and beta, your game will not succeed. That is just proof of the pudding. Now, this is true. Now, is that true for every genre? No. Twitch is not going to be the bell, the kind of canary in the coal mine for every game genre out there. But it certainly is for games with guns, especially multiplayer games with guns. They have to be very big on Twitch. And what happens when it's big on Twitch? It has a cascading effect across the other platforms we analyze and measure. So if you peak on Twitch for, let's say, live service shooter, then you will inevitably peak on YouTube. You'll inevitably peak on search. You'll inevitably peak on TikTok. These kind of become down, like lagging indicators to success off the leading indicator that's Twitch. But let's take another genre like platformers. Platformers, I've researched this a ton, to be big, or at least the trend we see is lots of attention on YouTube. People love consuming platformer pre-launch content on YouTube, whether they go back and watch other games of that franchise, whether they watch the kind of gameplay footage of the particular platformer. YouTube is the place to be for a platformer trying to break through because people like to see how the level design is. It's very important to the platformer community, right? So YouTube becomes a leading indicator and everything else is downwind from that, right? So we see these things and we go back to Concord. They did the things that you want to do as a live service shooter and they saw nothing. And not only did they see nothing, they were not trending on Twitch. And that's just the red alarm bell where you're like, this game is not ready. Do not ship it yet. We need to figure out how to put this game in front of players. We're not done our job. We need to figure this out, right? Not to say they do a job, but like, look, we got to figure this out. There's clearly something going on here. And that's why I said, be willing to move your release date. If it's not ready, it's not ready. Push it out, right? Figure it out. Communicate to the community like, hey, the game's not ready, or we're taking your feedback and we're going to incorporate X, Y, Z and go back into the shop until it's ready. So you're not like releasing something that's just not going to necessarily work. And we see those signals very, very early on. And where we see it depends on the game genre itself.
Well, so
I hope that was a good Concord talk.
No, yeah, I think that's awesome. And actually, it leads to another question, I guess, which is you said you could tell that pretty far in advance. I'm curious. Like I remember I've seen you mention 15 weeks. I think on LinkedIn some number of times, and that seems to be like a moment, an important moment. I guess it doesn't sound like that's arbitrary. What makes 15 weeks relevant, and when do you start? Can you get signal even before that? Because that's like 3.5 months out.
100%. Yeah. So we say 15 weeks because we notice a lot of marketing campaigns in the industry start at 3 months, right? So a little less than 15 weeks. And our whole point to the 15 weeks is like, it's actually a little bit more determined before you start pumping media. Because that's when media takes effect. That's when you start seeing a lot more paid. And so 15 weeks is a nice clean spot where there's a lot less paid and you can already model out what the outcome would be because you assume that paid is going to gravitate or increase demand by, let's say, anywhere from 100 to 300% to where it's at that point, right? So you can look and kind of forecast the future based on just trends you see across the publisher, trends you see against the genre. You kind of already know. So that's why 15 weeks matters. And to your point, we tell this all the time. Stop thinking about your game release as something that needs to be like a 3-month to launch cycle. It's actually much longer. The most successful games go further back, go a year, go 2 years, go 3 years, right? They are doing things far deeper in the past than you think they are. And we memory hold this when games launch. Like Power World is a really good example. Power World did content and announced it and was showing stuff, I believe, as far back as our tool goes, which is 2019, right? So they were out there early. And say what you would about Power World and all the drama that's around that game. But what they definitely did do that I think everyone can learn from is they weren't just a surprise. They were out there doing stuff, putting content out there, building community way earlier than people anticipated. So when the game comes out, boom, blows up like a rocket ship, right? Because they've done a lot of the heavy lifting, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes months and years sometimes, depending on the game. And this is especially true for new IP. You can't just assume that new IP can come out and just find an audience out the gate. Not to say it like never can happen, but it's very few and far between that can actually be true. So always thinking about your game's marketing campaign, or let's say launch strategy, months if not years in advance, as opposed to a quarter or two in advance, right?
Got it.
Now the exception to that, always the exception, Nintendo. They are very sneaky, and their directs are not that far out from the game launch, but they can get away with it because they're Nintendo, and they've trained their audience to move fast on new games, and ultimately they'll spend more time on new IP. But like if it's a Mario game, people expect a Mario game to come out in the spring. They expect a Mario game to come out in the fall. What are those games? We don't know yet. They'll probably announce them at a direct a quarter or two before launch and start previewing it out there. So Nintendo being kind of on their own on that one.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also like we've been seeing GTA 6 marketing for years. And not small stuff, like big stuff. So
and they don't have to do anything else. Yeah. They drop a trailer, the internet does the rest for them, right? Yeah. They're very advantageous on that. They don't have to go out there and constantly communicate to the players and the prospective players, because by putting content, they can know that the internet is going to take it over for them and do a lot of the heavy lifting, and they'll see a lot earned on that. But that's a GTA. If you're a new IP coming out, you're probably not GTA, so you're gonna have to find ways to really lean in and figure out like how do we take this and put it out to an audience faster and faster. Not to say a prediction, maybe a little bit, or like hindsight 2020, but no, we are doing this in June, early June, is at Mind's Eye. I think if they were really to be the makers of GTA and doing more, I think they should have been out there a lot earlier than they were doing with stuff, because like the signals are not great for that particular game. Not that they can't shift it around. There's always time, and I want to stress it's always time to fix things or to kind of change things. That's what we hope to show in our data, like for our partners, is like we report weekly. You can learn what happened last week and apply those learnings to this week to make changes that can maximize the return on players once you put your game out. So I always want to delineate that, but like as it stands now, I think Mind's Eye is in a precarious situation. It's being launched in a very crowded month. Shout out to another thing I think will be a monster hit, Rematch. Another French studio, something in the water over in France this year. Maybe we give the country the game development year award trophy for just bringing new stuff to the ecosystem. But this arcade style Rocket League inspired soccer game, I think it's going to be a pretty big hit. So if you look at the rest of the month, you have Mario Kart, you have Deltarune, you have Rematch, you have Death Stranding 2. Those are 4 big games. Dune Awakening, I think, wants to find an audience as well. That's 5. And then there's not a lot more there because, again, you're dealing with that 15%.
Yeah.
That's your 15%. And that's a lot. And that's a challenge for anything else that's not in that top, 4 or 5 group.
I think it's interesting, too. There's a through line of some of what you've been saying, which is if we go back long enough, the way you got a game into players' hands was you rented shelf space, or you bought shelf space, right? And so you had to actually have a physical copy of your product. I mean, I remember going to Electronics Boutique, the defunct Electronic, but like GameStops are still out there. They technically have space on shelves, and you go in and you buy the product. And so I think that locked in release dates a lot more. And it did make sense, like that targeting of the fall windows, so that grandma and mom would go into the Electronics Boutique and ask the person, like, what game should I get my son? And the person would say, like, well, what do they like to play? And they'd say, I don't know, this one with this, I think it's a James Bond game. And they'd be like, oh, okay, let me bring you over to Perfect Dark. That's a similar, whatever it is, right? And you could have that sort of thing. But it meant that when you were running up to launch, you really did have to be well ahead of it, because you had to have all your CDs printed. Your Gold Master needed to be on the shelves. And what's interesting, though, there's almost like a lag of that's still there now. Like you're talking about sort of this 3-month and then you go, and we have to know when we're going to release, and this is the release date. And so, sorry, I'm long-winded on this question or this statement.
Oh, no, that's great.
It's this way of saying, like, you're basically saying, hey, if you find out 3 weeks before you're about to go live that, like, it's not a good window because Oblivion just dropped. Right? Oblivion Remastered just dropped, and completely, that's just spiked. Congratulations. You needed a fairly open window. You thought you had one. Now you don't, or whatever. Shift your release date. And I know that's a very
potentially painful and expensive decision in the moment. Like in the short term, that feels really awful. But the consequence of coming out alongside a major hit game versus not could be your game being a major hit game or not. Because again, you're fighting for that 15% attention.
100% true. Yep. And I know I'm a bit of a hand wavy on this, where it's so easy, just move your release date. And I know there's a lot of complexity that goes into a statement like that, but I think more just the openness to it and the realization that there is only so much to go around right now. And, we ultimately have to be aware of the market dynamics, and as such, be willing to shift things here or there, even on the margins. If you release your game, if your game is done and you're like, no, we're going to go headstrong on a release date we had on the calendar, and I think an openness to really give it early. You know what gamers love more than a game that comes out on time? A game that comes early. It's actually this complete game is ready now. Put it in their hands. Let's just go, right? I think gamers would be warm to that, especially if it's a good game, right? So don't be stuck on a release date if you're not like a Marvel movie doing VFX into the hours before the movie shipped. Like, if it's not that, you're just sitting on it. Like, have an openness to releasing it or early. And if you have to move it to the month after, kind of going back to my Indiana Jones, box I stand on all the time. Like, I think an openness to moving it to January, especially if it's not really going to impact the numbers in the long term. If your game is that good, if your game could have that much attention on it, having a willingness to move it out of the way of other big games, I think is something the gaming industry has to at least ask the question internally. Like, shouldn't we just move our game off of this game because we're not going to do as well? Or you're going to cannibalize each other. If they both are great, you're both going to hurt your TAMs, and just maybe one of us has to move so that we can both kind of do amazingly well. I think is a real question they should ask.
It's funny. I think movies have been thinking. I don't want to undersell our industry. It's not like we haven't thought about these things. Obviously, like people saw when GTA 6 was going to drop, and you see a bunch of stuff start shifting, and okay, Switch 2 is coming out here. Okay, you start doing some gymnastics on the timeline. But I do feel like this is something that movies has been thinking about for decades and decades of just okay, cool. How can we get a big long launch for our movie? Now they're having to compete with streaming services and when that. So they're just, but they've actually been doing this for a very long time, and it does seem like it's more of a thing of, hey, maybe it's easier, and maybe we need to build. Go ahead.
But I actually think it's a bit of the movie industry mentality that's kind of inflicted the gaming industry, and it's not born to not be true. Like movies, like when people think, oh, I can counter program a Marvel movie with a rom-com, or at least I was thinking for a long time, right? That was probably true, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, right. People can see 2 movies in a weekend because the movie is 2 to 3 hour experience in total.
Barbenheimer, right? Yeah,
I can do 2 in a weekend. It's not mutually exclusive. And then unlike gaming or movies, don't have the most popular games are usually 15 years old. I myself am not watching let's say what's a trilogy that came out. I'm not watching the original Iron Man trilogy in an endless loop, and that's the only content I watch, right?
Yeah.
That is not my media digest when it comes to movies. Whereas gaming, that is very much how people operate. They are consuming the thing that came out 15 years ago more than the thing that comes out now. So we're in a unique situation where the more content that comes out, the more stuff there is to already engage with, that it's just going to be harder and harder to kind of, pop new things. And that's kind of, I always say the scary part, I was alluded to, it's that's the scary part. The more stuff that comes out, the harder it is for new stuff to come out. But it's also the opportunity. It requires you to think more uniquely and what am I creating? What am I bringing that is new or fresh to the market? I think this notion of we can't come up with a game that came out 20 years ago and put a fresh coat of paint on. Bias of myself and when I grew up, but out of State of Play yesterday, I was most excited about Tactics being remastered. I was like, hallelujah, Final Fantasy Tactics, my favorite Final Fantasy of all the Final Fantasies, not number related. I'm excited to play this game. I can't wait to see. And not only are they giving me Tactics, they're giving me the original Tactics that's now playable on a modern device. And they're coming with another version, which is the remastered version, which I'm sure it's Square Enix. They're going to make some changes in the narrative. It's not going to make me happy. I'll probably play both just to see what it is, right?
Yep.
So I'm excited. So even if you're just taking something that was old and making it new again, I think is a lot of opportunity in the gaming industry. Never mind, you can reinvent the genre and put your own like cultural spin on it. See, Glare Obscure, like just took the turn-based JRPG format and made it into something distinctly, I would argue, French, and I think it's great for it, right? And I think that's great, and we should see more of that in the industry as well, and not be scared off because it's quote unquote a stale genre. Every time people say stale genres, you look across like what were the biggest games of like last couple of years, which you said Baldur's Gate was gonna be as big as it was. No, but monster hit. Like I thought everyone just wants live service games and shooters, and like the things that keep on popping with audiences are single player, sometimes turn-based systems. We're like, I thought we moved away from that. Like, no, I think people like it if you put a fresh spin on it, if you modernize it, if you do something unique, there'll be an audience there for it, right? And I think there's a lot more creativity out there than some of the prognosticators would say there is. I think there's a lot more room for creativity and making great experiences.
We've talked a bit already about different platforms, and that actually you're looking at all platforms. You're not localized in on like PC, console, or mobile, or mobile, anything. Like, you're not focused in on any one particular platform. Do you see dramatically different signal? Because I think about a mobile game cycle, like a game dev cycle for a mobile product, and how different that is from, a AAA product that takes 5 years to develop. And I'm thinking about like how does that shift how you might anticipate success? Is there much of a shift in how you might anticipate success of a mobile product versus a PC or a console product?
Yeah, I think a couple things about the mobile market, and coming at this as like a bit of an outsider to the mobile industry. One, I mean, what I would say is there was a way to find players and users in a pre-ATT world, so Apple transparency and tracking, right? So read up on it if you don't know what it is. Fascinating or scary topic, but basically they destroyed user acquisition in mobile by making it harder for and much more expensive. Let's be real. It's not that you can't find players in mobile. It's that it became much more expensive to find players in mobile. So that changed the paradigm. So when I think about mobile, there is the pre-ATT games, which are the let's call it power law effective gaming, where you have Honor of Kings, you have Candy Crush, you have these monster games that existed for a decade plus, much like console PC games that are predominantly the monster games of today, right? So it's much harder to break in the mobile market as a net new thing. Not to say it can't happen. Let's case study Monopoly Go. What did they do? I think just where I tip my hat, they spent a lot of money garnering a lot of attention. They went to the traditional marketing route. They just did a brand campaign behind this game, right? Like, as crazy as that sounds, and then obviously they're seeing a lot of return, and the people say, well, they spend a lot more than they should based on how much revenue they're making. I think they're making a lot of revenue. I just required a lot of capital up front to make a lot of revenue, was maybe a better way to put it, but it's wildly successful. So I think mobile is trying different things to figure how to not fix itself, but like how to react in the post-ATT world. And maybe it is becoming more like, for certain mobile titles, not every, maybe a match 3 game doesn't need this per se, but like for certain mobile titles, it does need to be treated more like a AAA console PC release with a marketing campaign to drive awareness, yada, 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 to launch, as opposed to releasing in a single market, figuring out the UA algorithm, and then expanding across the world. I think it's a bit different than that now, especially when you're trying to tell people this thing exists on this particular device. I think that's like something the mobile industry is, you're seeing it kind of being experimented on here and there, but I think that's a shift in terms of platform side, right? And they're also thinking about, can we put this on Steam? Like, can we make our mobile game cross-platform? You called out Hearthstone, Marvel Snap, and like card games. Easily transferable to multiple devices because of the nature of the game and the kind of form factor of how you play those games. But like, I think other mobile games are thinking too, like Chewy also think about releasing our game on Steam or the Switch or whatever it might be to just maximize our audiences on different platforms. And I would say the answer is yes, mobile games should be thinking about that. And it would say yes, that's a thing to think about and to explore for them.
Yeah. So that's the kind of the platform side, that there is some difference in how people are approaching this, and there should be. I also want to talk about various scales, because we've talked about different products. We've spent a lot of time in what most people see as the AA, AAA space, but there's indies out there. There's the single A. There's I've heard even like III, III, III type of stuff. there's all this different terminology we have around size of studio. A recent hit that surprised everybody was Schedule 1. I don't know if there was any marketing behind that. I wasn't aware. Or did it just drop and take off? And if you were giving advice to someone on the indie side, obviously, like, I think one of the things that's difficult to recognize is that the indie side has very different success criteria. Where, like, if I'm a AAA product, I need to sell at minimum hundreds of thousands and probably millions of copies.
Oh yeah, your number is like, if it's not doing like 2 to 3 million copies in the first month, and like, you know, we have some unfortunate soul searching to do internally, right?
Yes,
100% true, right?
Right. Whereas Animal Well, a very successful indie platformer, built by one person, that game that doesn't need, like, if it sells, you know, I don't know, if it sells 20,000 copies, like, huge win. I don't remember what it cost, but like, that's a ton of money for whoever built it.
You touched on 2 great case studies, and I'll throw Among Us in there too. Like, these are case studies of content creator community glomming onto something, whether they decide to because they like a game or they decide to because of other reasons. Like, they jump in on a thing. So I think if you're an indie developer, and they all try to do this, you know, NOL was with Donkey, right? Like, close alignment with Donkey, supporter with Donkey. Donkey was out there with his audience all the time saying, "Isn't this a great game?" Like, I distinctly remember his video on Call of Duty Black Ops 6 where he was talking about him trying to download Black Ops 6 to play Black Ops 6 and it taking so long to set up the game. And then he's like, but by the way, I've downloaded Animal Well 100 times on my machine and I could be playing this right now. I thought it was great marketing and a funny video, just kind of making fun of the size of games that they have basically become on the AAA side. So great video, but savvy marketing too. And that's like, you know, you're right. Animal Well doesn't... I think that's the thing that smaller game makers have, like, a lot more leeway to experiment, whereas a big company is very much got to do things a certain way, or they feel like they have to because there's a lot more risk on their end.
Yeah.
I'd say there's not risk on the smaller side, but like ultimately, like you can, to be successful is a much smaller amount of like, it's a much less risky endeavor for them, let's say, right? And so because their TAM is much smaller, like, they can do tens of thousands of copies and be wildly successful. In our system, we measure all games because they too pull the attention and demand away from the big games, and we say you could benchmark yourself against the hundreds of indie games that you would want to, like, benchmark yourself against until your launch and, like, see what is working, what's not working. But, like, with the ones that are, like, quote unquote, I'll call it viral hits, are oftentimes powered by the creator economy when they, like, get a hold of them. And you see that with Schedule 1 too. It's like creator economy driven, right?
Yeah. Well, and Among Us is a great example because it launched and then was sort of bumping along for a very long time, and then it, you know, it had that moment.
Yeah, when the streamer community thought in COVID, like, wouldn't it be great if we could all play Secret Hitler, Among Us, in together as a party game, and it just took off and became a brand of its own. 100%. There's also, like, that's the side of the gaming ecosystem that has the most stress on it, partially in part because there's so many people that can make quote unquote an indie game. So you're actually facing the fiercest amount of competition to garner attention. They're the most likely cohort, going back to what I was saying earlier, to fall in the no attention. Thus, you are just unfortunately not going to find an audience. So when I think about that, and I think about what can they do to break out of that, to make sure that at least they're not in the no attention category, it is really being creative on how to engage or build a community from scratch, from ground up, right? Thinking very long on that. Like, and maybe your North Star to bring the conversation full circle is like Toby Fox at Deltarune, a indie developer himself, has built a feverish community behind his IP, and it will ultimately bore to be a lot of success for that team, right? And thinking like, now we're not going to be, Undertale a Deltarune per se, but can we take lessons of, they're not spending a ton of money. So that's why I always say, like, they didn't have to spend a ton of money to do what they're doing. They were just able to build and cultivate a community. So there are other means and tactics to build and cultivate a community, right, over time. And you don't have to think of a massive Discord server with millions of people in it. You just need something that is much, your early point. If we could sell 10,000 copies we've made our budget back and we're in the green and we've put something out there we think that people will love, and maybe because the first thing found an audience of 10,000, we can either update, sequelize, or continue on this path, and then the next thing we'll find 20,000, and then 60,000, and on and on and on. And you grow, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Or you just serve the community you have to.
Right.
The other thing we tell people all the time: you don't have to aspire to sell 20 million copies, and maybe games can exist and businesses can exist with much smaller goals in mind, and that is okay.
Right. Yes. There's still somebody running a successful bookstore somewhere in a city. And like, yes, Amazon exists, and yes, Barnes & Noble exists, and I still have the thing that I do, and it pays the bills, and I like it. So, yeah.
100%. You don't have to be the number one game on Steam DB. You can be number, whatever beyond that, and have a successful kind of business for you and anyone else you're supporting. So I think the realization that you don't have to be a full bore capitalist with everything you do is, I think, a healthy thing for the industry to kind of realize.
Yeah. Hey, leaders and game devs, if you love what we do here at Building Better Games, imagine what we could create with your support. By joining our Patreon, you help us bring deeper insights, develop better training, and host more expert discussions to level up your leadership and game development skills. Plus, as a patron, you're going to get exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early access to episodes, and a chance to ask your burning questions directly to us. Join now and help us build better games together. I want to make sure we hit something, because maybe someone's out there and they're looking at your newsletter, or they're like staring now. They're like, oh shoot, let me go look, and they're going like, I don't know if I'm actually well set up here. I don't know if I'm doing well. And so is there anything you mentioned moving the date? We talked about that a lot. But what else would you recommend for a game that's going towards a release that they've kind of got planned, and they're realizing, okay, the signals aren't strong. What can I do right now?
I honestly think, like, just analyzing the channel stuff we say, like, the biggest thing we kind of tell our partners to focus in on, both big and small, is like, they get so hung up on volume metrics. Like, we think like looking at the relative channel metric, like relative rank across channels, is equally, or if not more important to thinking about like how we are defining our own success. So like literally I would start to kind of like, we'd benchmark and be like, okay, where do you need to be to hit a certain mindshare score based on this period of time, and like analyze the channel level stuff so they can go be a little bit more tactical with like how they execute on that, right? So do we need to do more engagement and strategy and kind of thinking about how we reach to the Twitch community? I think we've talked about that a lot, but maybe like kind of pivoting again, like, or maybe it's something like on YouTube. Like, so I really just think about like understanding the kind of game you're in and what the kind of channel strategy should be, and like, and then kind of strategizing how to like maximize attention on those channels, right? To drive up like your ultimate like TAM and see a as positive outcome as you can be. So I think and that it doesn't have to be like creating a crazy trailer, although it can be. Like sometimes you're like, yeah, the trailer didn't work, go cut another one. If you're a big company, right? We've told them before. Like you look at our data, we were update weekly. You put an asset out there, it's flat, probably didn't work. Get back to the editing bay and try again, and see what would move it the next forward. So just don't be hung up on like, we put out a reveal trailer, like, and it didn't work. I'm like, okay, then cut another one. Try again and see if the next one with better assets, or different assets, let's say, not better. Better assets can yield a different outcome, right? Or focusing on a different aspect of the game, or showing people something other than a cinematic trailer. Maybe they just want to see gameplay, so put in something that's more gameplay dependent out there. Would be a strategy too, right? So, and then going back and check, did it work? I think what I would say is kind of, if I themize what I'm trying to get across, is like, be willing to experiment across the spectrum, whether that's moving your release date, or just changing what you're doing and having an openness to saying, yep, well, that didn't work, and then going back to and tweaking and changing it again and again and again.
If I meta out and kind of abstract from that,
please.
There's this idea in a lot of what you're saying, which is you have to create a marketing plan that is flexible, because you actually don't know what's going to be going on when you roll in. You don't know which assets are going to work and aren't. Again, unless if you're a Nintendo or a Rockstar and you can kind of just get away with like putting GTA 6 as a logo out into the world, and that's it. Like that works for most people in most circumstances. Having flexibility in that plan, not just around release date, but in terms of like, okay, that asset didn't work. Do we have others that we can quickly spin up to try? And also to be watching and going like, look, nothing's working. Like maybe this needs to go back in the oven for a bit, or like maybe there's something else we need to try to do. Like, because you're going to run into all these situations if you're out there. So anyway, that's sort of that meta idea that's coming through in a lot of what you're saying is you have to be flexible because you cannot control the environment.
100%. And like a willingness to share more, share often, I don't think is a thing that I think about a lot, right? So going back to, you found your core community of 10,000 people that are part of your Discord server. Share what you're doing. Like, I think communicating as often as you can with your core audience is always a good idea, because then especially if you listen to them. If you don't listen to them, then challenges, right? But listen to them, hear what they have to say, because if they're their core, what they really want to do, and we saw this at Twitch all the time, like with the communities and the streamers, they want to see them be successful. That's what they want more than anything. Like it's like a sports team. It's a partial, like, I feel psychologically I am on the journey with the person or the thing I'm supporting, and as such I'm going to give them the feedback I think will drive success. And then you look at it in an aggregate, like then you can make changes, maximize things, and kind of put it out there again and again and again, right? So I think like listening to community, and I kind of go full circle, but I think building a community and to build like a solid foundation to putting together what ultimately a gaming release strategy is critical, right? You have to be out early, build the community, find your core, build on the core, and then ultimately listen to the core as you kind of put things out there in market. And if it doesn't work, then kind of going back and say, well, what's not working that worked for these people, right? But having an openness to experiment, back to what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh gosh, for some reason I want to talk about two shooter titles.
Please.
So that these were ones that I wanted. I want to succeed in one's case, and I wanted to succeed in others, and it did not. And I thought it was interesting because you talked about Twitch, and I think that Spectre Divide was they actually tried to get the Twitch attention, right? They had like Shroud as somebody, an investor in the company, somewhat involved in the game development, all these different things. And it seemed like okay, cool, you must be really set up. I think they thought they found like a ticket to this is going to get us traction and whatnot. And that, I mean, it did okay, but as a free play live service, it was just like from the very beginning, it was not trending well. I don't know if you ever did any like looking into that. I'm
gonna take this as an opportunity to talk about. I know vaguely what it is, but it follows a trend of so much other stuff I see. So let me kind of take it and go with like, especially with shooters, like not unique, but like kind of like what I would say about any genre, let's say shooters, is like, one, they often run in like micro oligopolies. What does that mean? I think every shooter and subgenre of a shooter, or whatever you want to call it, right, has room for 1 to like 3 entrants per genre, right? So when Marvel Rivals found success, it was part because there weren't a lot of hero shooters. It was Overwatch,
kind of TF2, and that's it.
Yeah, very limited, open. Like it was an all red ocean at that point, right? There was blue ocean to be had, and so it was a matter of, was your game going to be the thing that fits next to Overwatch 2? Now, if I were to look at the hero shooter genre now, and we've done this with like a graph looking at hero shooters that are coming out or are out. Let's poke, at Frank Punk, Nettie's other kind of experiment, which I would say didn't go as well as Marvel Rivals. Like, you have to do so much more different, knowing that you're now going to have to pull people away from either Overwatch 2 or Marvel Rivals, knowing that there's twice the competition, twice as much, effects. I was talking earlier, like going back to my switching cost, skill, money, friends. Like, those things are very hard and strong gravitational pulls to fight against. So you're the next one coming up, like, it's going to be a lot harder. So I think really look at the ecosystem and the landscape and saying, are we doing something different, or are we going to be able to win against these things? Or should we think of another thing to ultimately do and be a little bit more creative instead of carbon copy, right?
And Spectre Divide, from what you're just saying, you're running into Counter-Strike, you're running into Rainbow Six Siege, you're running into Valorant.
in the tactical shooter space. Those are big, heavy hitting contenders with established audiences that are like filling that tactical. And it's interesting because you said like, you know, some number of these per subgenre. I think about MOBAs. I think they're not shooters, but like League and Dota, right? Like that's what's out there.
I can go across so many genres. MMORPGs, you have Final Fantasy, you have RuneScape, you have WoW. Boom, that's your MMORPG market, right? You can go on. And once you start analyzing the markets and realizing what are the 2 to 3 games that kind of predominantly own the share of time and attention, it's much harder to like basically break through. And mobile is literally the same thing. Like certain like match 3 games, there's only so many of those that can exist within that market, and then it basically becomes the long tail thereafter. And you can, and to be completely transparent, like you could still succeed in those markets if your aspirations and your budget and everything else, like if you were a team of 10 people making a fun shooter and you only had to find 20 to 30,000 people that'd be passionate about your thing, then yeah, you for sure could exist in an equilibrium where there's these massive AAA games trying to pull all the attention and demand, and they exist in oligopoly. Yeah. But what ultimately happens is that's not what's famously failing. It's these massive studios also thinking like, well, if Riot and EA can do it, we can do it too. And they're like, you're assuming that a lot of things to be true in order to find success there. And I think that's the challenge. I think that the industry is I think they've realized it and they're just kind of moving away from it. And I applaud, it sucks, but I applaud companies that walk away from releasing and going all in on a live service experience if they don't think it's going to work, instead of like railing them. I'd be like, at least they decided to do it now before they doubled the budget with marketing, right? They walked away from this live service thing. I hope they use the assets on something else. As a fan of Spider-Man and Insomniac Games, I would say I'm so happy they didn't come out with a live service Spider-Man. I'm sorry that live service Spider-Man was leaked on the internet through hacking. Sucks, but it was. But to Sony's credit, they said, you know what? No, at some point during the development, and it looked like it was going to be a Spider-Verse style like live service game, and I hope to see those assets appear in a future Spider-Man and or Insomniac Marvel title down the line. And those people on that team went to work on whatever they're doing next at that studio, right? So that's what I'm like hopeful, and like good that you didn't go further down the kind of rabbit hole of trying to do something that probably wouldn't have worked out in the long run.
Got it. And then the other one that I'm hoping works, because I'm a big fan of the genre and I'm a big fan of the studio, and I think you've actually written about this, is Marathon.
Oh no. Oh no. Yeah. We're alone on the hill on this one. I don't, unsure what's happening with that game as much as the rest of the internet. So I want to make sure I put that out there to begin with, right? We think they did a great job with its initial event and thereafter, right? So people want to say, oh, what a bad job. I'm like, no, they're actually, I'll look at my demand curve right now. I actually have it open. They are the number one most like in demand game coming into that September, October month so far this year. Now, not updated with any SGF information, so I want to caveat that. So we're looking pretty early on, but we're looking at a competition between Borderlands, Marathon, and Ghost of Yote to a lesser extent. Like they're all coming out within the same month window, and right now Marathon is trending better than all of them. That said, warning signs for Marathon, its demand curve has flatlined. So we say that like they peaked, and now it's becoming flat, meaning that they're not building on demand week over week. They're sustaining or not moving up the curve. Whereas Borderlands 4 at least is starting to creep up a bit more. It's got a long, long way to go to catch the Marathon, and that would be a concern if I was 2K, but Marathon has flatlined. So that all said, what does that tell me? Even negative attention is attention, so they garnered a lot of it out the gate, and now I think they have some challenges with the community and with the game that they're going to have to work through before it comes out to launch this fall, or if you rumors should believe, sometime in the distant future. Maybe there's more clarity on that by the time this comes out. But like,
yeah. No, I it's interesting to hear that, because I remember, I think I saw your post about it that actually said Marathon is in the dominant position right now, even as everybody's sort of like, oh no, dead game, all these different things. And I was like, I mean, we can all critique it and this and that and the other, and I'd be very curious to see if our graders changed anything around the marathon when that came out. But it's a, I thought that they actually did a really good job of bringing in a lot of attention.
And let me flip it on the other head. This is what I tell people. There are normies out there, and the number one signal we look at that I call normie signal is search. People, the normies of the world, search. They're not on X screaming about whether things great or not great. They're not on YouTube making videos about tearing down things or uplifting them and fighting this war on basically how to feel about a thing. Normies just search for stuff, and you can look at it. Are they more interested or less interested? Is really told by how much volume are they getting and how that relative rank goes up or down, right? That's I'll call the normie metric, right? And search is trending. I'll look at Marathon as of now. They're trending at, they've kind of hit a low point in search, and they're about half the size of search right now than Borderlands 4 is as of last week. But they were doing they started at 4 million search and they went to 1.5 and they hit that twice. Whereas Borderlands 4 has yet to hit 1 million, or they did once. They very rarely pass 1 million in search volume on a given week. So to me, there's the normies are engaging with Marathon, and you're like, okay, what are they looking for? And I think what I think, secondarily, it's the sequel to Destiny from the makers of Destiny come Marathon, right? What's Marathon? They probably don't know what Marathon is because normies are generally just aware of the thing, and so they're looking at it as the next thing from Bungie, and that's awesome. So they were going to kind of engage with it, and then it's now plateaued, right? Because they've looked and they're like, oh, it doesn't look like it's a thing that's going to happen. There's a lot of negativity on it. It's going to turn off the normies as well. Oh, maybe this is not a thing for me, or I don't know. I need to see more information. So that would be kind of the downside to kind of what Marathon's going through right now. Yeah. But to be black and white about it, they garnered a lot of attention, and you see it in some of the underlying metrics that make up our scores.
Yeah, yeah. So you would actually say to all the people that are sort of saying, oh no, everything's ruined, is actually, yeah, I mean, there's some issues there's some negative attention, but this is not in a horrible spot right now.
Yeah, they definitely can fix it, and they definitely can. So one, I definitely feel like Marathon could fix where they're at, right? I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that it's dead on arrival. Two, but that said, the thing that's tricky about what they're trying to do, as a quasi live service game, paid live service game, right, which in itself I think has made a lot of people angry, is they have to not only think about whether people are there on day one. I believe I said it earlier in our conversation. Lots of bad games make lots of money. It's not impossible for games that are bad to come out the gate and make back their budget in that initial sale window and be like, oh, okay, well, it wasn't critically acclaimed, but we made all our money back, and maybe our brand is a little dinged because we did this, but ultimately at least we recouped our budget and we can go on to the next thing, right? And take our lessons on this. Marathon is trying to do two things. It's trying to sell a lot of games out the gate, which I would say it probably will sell a lot of games out the gate. And the second thing it needs to do is keep people there forever. And I think that is where you see a lot of the friction points, right? Where it's will people be there forever? I'm a lot bullish on that one. I think people will be there day one, or at least a not zero amount of people. It's not going to be a Concord level of miss, at least on the initial player estimates. But then will they stay? That's challenging. But I think that's a challenge for any kind of shooter game in general. It's the question of will they stay? And even successful launches like the finals didn't have people stay, right?
Yeah.
And that's... Marketing could bring people to the door. Live service keeps people there. They have to work hand in hand with each other, and that's maybe the most challenging thing when it comes to live service ecosystems. Is you're trying to do two things: get people in at the gate, and then keep them there forever.
Yeah. No, it's I thank you for the insight. I appreciate too your slightly contrarian take compared to the rest of everything. I think that's again. I think this is.
Yeah, and I hope you're okay with all the hedging I did, because I do want to caution that when we were making those comments, it was a lot rosier than the thing I'm seeing at this moment. But they're still far enough out where they could come out with a really good beta and change everything, right? We made these changes to the games, or you see things, or we're pushing our game back a bit.
Yeah.
But the beta will come when we originally launch in the game.
I wouldn't be surprised if they caught the negative wave, realized that the negative wave is something that maybe if they go dark a little bit and then sort of ramp back up, that might be sufficient. I've seen all sorts of things like, oh, their marketing campaign is getting canned or whatever. Like, I don't really know all the details on any of that, but it's interesting.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like, a lot of it's hedging. I think it's always, what you're bringing to the table is, hey, look, we have seen this data when, run through these algorithms, predict certain things, and this is what this one seems to be predicting. And like, that's, I think, helpful because we can get into the small percentage of people that play on Reddit and watch Twitch and these sorts of things, echo chamber world of like, well, obviously that's going to be dead, or obviously that's going to be the biggest hit in the world. And I think a lot of people thought that about, like, I'm going to come back to Spectre Divide. I think a lot of people thought it was, oh yeah, it's got to be huge, right? Because, Shroud, right? And to your point, normies don't know who Shroud is. They don't care who Shroud is. They've never gone to Twitch. They don't do that sort of thing. And actually, I think it was always fascinating to think how much weight it is easy to put on all the people that are very vocal without realizing that they are quite a minority of the player base of the global gamer population. Most people do this as a side hobby, not as something that they're going and like, I need to argue with someone on Reddit about like this weapon.
100%.
Yeah.
And the thing I will say about the marathon side is the people that are the loudest anti-marathon critics are also the people that will 100% buy this game for whatever I think is $40 price point
right.
on day one. They will be there playing day one, and they will write about it and complain about it day one. Like, they are locked in to play this game, and that's why I think the commentary on this is so silly. I'm like, you guys are all there to play this game because you're the same community from Destiny, right? Like, you're the same like relationship you've had with Bungie for as long as Bungie's been doing live service games, which, gosh, it's been a while now. It's like you guys all kind of argue about the same stuff and feel about the same stuff, so you're there day one. It's really does this game appeal to normies who will be there day one, and they probably would be, and then will they stay around, which, like I was saying earlier, that's a big iffy, and like everything they say is like there's not enough content, it's an extraction shooter, like it's just like that might be the challenge they have, is like, can they keep people there past day one? And that's an interesting question. And then I think the normies would ask, where's Destiny 3? Because that's, like we always say, people love numeric numbers against a title. If you want to reset things, just come out with another one with the next numerical title or number next to it, right?
Yeah.
So
Call of Duty has mastered this. They're the best in the world. Well, them and
EA
EA Sports franchises and Call of Duty, they're good at this thing. Last thing I wanted to ask you about, audience of this podcast, leaders in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems, want to solve the right ones. You bring a perspective into this that isn't like necessarily inside the studio and how do I get my team to run well and function inside of the org. You're looking at this through that lens of, what does it mean for a game to launch successfully and how can we tell if it's going to or not? What advice would you give to the broad world of game dev leaders out there that maybe don't have as much exposure into the space as you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about this because I knew this question was coming. And honestly, I think like you might not have as extensive of a database and a sophisticated model like we do at Mind Game. But I would say that what you do have is you have agency to at least sense check some stuff. And I'd always argue, like, don't rely on your publisher, if it's a third-party publisher, to tell you how the thing is doing or not doing. Use your fingers, your arms, your eyes, and go see if your Discord community is growing. Go see if your subreddit is growing. Go see with your own eyes if you're seeing an increase in attention on Twitch or YouTube or whatever that might be. Like, you can do things that at least won't necessarily tell you the whole thing, but you'll have a sense of, is this going great or not great? And don't rely on your third-party publisher who comes in and maybe says, oh, we have to wait till the massive survey comes back. Like, you can do certain things on your end to at least gut check some of the stuff, and that's what I recommend. Like, again, like, won't be as crazy as what we do, but that's okay. You could still look at some of the sources that I've outlined that we track and look at those and say, are we seeing things we want to see or not see things that we want to see there?
Nice. Cool. Anything else?
No, follow my newsletter, or newsletters.
Yeah.
Right?
Go ahead, plug away. What do you
yeah.
got?
Can I? Yeah, I got mindgamedata.com. We have a newsletter to kind of subscribe to. So please do. We do our updates on Tuesday. It's really just a landscape of what's happening in the gaming industry as of last week, and we tend to both write about the biggest things as we can't help ourselves, but we also tend to kind of veer off and talk about things that the Western side of the world doesn't pay attention to, like what's going on in APAC, right? And try to put a light on like things that are massive in gaming, but maybe not necessarily massive in the lens that we like to look at over here. And and why? Because gaming is inherently a global thing, and so audiences are global, and your TAM is global if you think about it that way. And the second, I plug myself. I'm Colan Neese. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter there now where I zag on a major newsletter that we do once a week to kind of do I call patch notes, or kind of deep dives into things that I find curious. So I did a whole thing on Delta Rune. I'm sure I'll have a couple more pieces before this makes it out there. But follow. I think we shine some data light on some upcoming games that don't necessarily get talked about in the massive ecosystem is our aim with that newsletter. So yeah, do that too as well.
Fantastic. And just as a note to those out there, I don't really go in for newsletters, and I am going to be signing up for both of these because I have gotten so much out of Colin's LinkedIn posts. So if you trust my judgment, some of you do, I recommend at least checking it out. Take a peek at it. It's some really interesting stuff. I love it when people are able to put together, even how you said it at the beginning, which is there are these giant corporations out there, Nielsen and others, that have spent a long time trying to figure out how to understand data. And in some ways, I feel what you're describing to me is almost game dev is behind on this curve. And it's not because the information doesn't exist. It's because we don't know how to pull it together into something that could be helpful to us. And so you're doing that, and I appreciate what you're sharing. Appreciate what you're doing. I hope it helps the industry.
Thank you. And I appreciate you having me, Ben. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Have a good one, Colin. Till next time.
Talk to you later. Bye.
This one was full of insights, so this is going to take a minute, but I want to give you my summary, having just gone through this again. Fantastic episode. So, first, our biases and anecdotes about what games are likely to be successful are not as predictive as we'd want. We need to be better about getting to the data that matters for understanding if a game will hit or not. Second, marketing and community are no longer something to do for a short time just before launch. Some of the most successful games, even small ones, had community and attention growing years in advance, from Blacksmith to Palworld to Deltarune. Third, as painful as it might seem, you don't want to release into a crowded window. It's better to move things up. If you're willing to move your launch date back or even forward to avoid going up against other high-attention games, it can be a very smart move. Remember, we're all fighting for the 15% of available attention any given week. If you can't win when you'd planned to, be willing to pivot and find somewhere where you can. Fourth, 3 switching costs to consider when going up against entrenched incumbent games. First, players have spent money on it. Second, players have invested time and become good. They've developed mastery. Third, players have established social networks. You're fighting all of those forces. Fifth, as of today, and acknowledging this varies a bit genre to genre around what's most important, you want to be looking at data from search across the board, YouTube engagement, Twitch, Reddit, TikTok, and Steam. All of that's highly worthwhile. Tack in app magic data for mobile as well. Narrower looks at things like Steam wish lists and especially Metacritic scores aren't going to help you as much as you'd like. Sixth, there are 3 attention categories a game may be in: none, negative, and positive. None means no matter how good the game is, you won't get players. Negative means you might see a spike, of attention at least, but it'll disappear if you don't make big changes. And positive means hang on to your hat, we're going to the moon. Seventh, it's a myth that we can categorize players into genres and expect them not to compete with each other. Be wary of over-specializing your personas or audience descriptions and not realizing that many players love playing Battlefield, Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft, Pokemon, and StarCraft, even though they all are pretty different. You are all competing for that 15% when you're in game development. 8. See the whole calendar as space to release. There's this old view of 2 windows, pre-holiday and spring. It's just not like that anymore. There are 12 months in every year that games are played. Take advantage. 9th, be wary of claims that a genre is dead. It might be true, and I've said it myself about things like RTS, but that genre might just be waiting for the game that upends the narrative. 10th, keep your marketing and release plan flexible. Don't expect everything you do to work exactly like you wanted. Be ready to pivot, or have to redo things and try again to garner attention. Blindly following the plan increases your odds of smashing into a wall. 11th, most genres have a couple of big winners, and everyone else is either losing or small enough to sustain themselves without being huge. Going head-to-head with established live service or franchise products is not as simple as making a better game. Be careful. 12th, do your own research. If you are on the dev side, don't just let someone else handle it. The reality is even most publishers aren't particularly well informed on this stuff right now. If you want your game to work, spend the time to understand how much attention you are getting, and if that means things need to change. Again, there were even more that I could have put on, but these were the top 12. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I certainly did. I thought it was an amazing conversation. So thanks for listening. Bye.